By far, the most common experience that people have when they begin to practice mindfulness meditation is that they discover that their mind wanders. Almost incessantly, it seems. But the big breakthrough that often happens is that when people share this in class, they learn that this is actually the nature of the mind to do this. Everybody's mind wanders. This is actually a phenomena that neuroscientists refer to as the default mode, and is characterized by repetitive, self-referential, and ruminative thinking that's usually not productive, and it's the primary source of worry, fear, sadness, and stress in our lives. The task of the person practicing mindfulness then becomes not to stop the default mode, which is a natural function of the brain, but instead to choose to engage in a more intentional and present-focused mode of mind in which the habitual tendencies of the mind are left behind, and the person can see things more clearly as they are. This has tremendous implications for overcoming our old habits and patterns, seeing outside the box of our preconceived notions, and noting the profound interconnectedness of all things when we put aside our notions of what is separate and what is disconnected. We're all wired to be prepared to deal with the threat of various sorts. I'm sure you're familiar with sympathetic arousal or fight or flight that tends to kick in when we're in physical danger. But it also manifests when we perceive a threat of a more psychological or conceptual nature. For example, our sympathetic nervous system can activate if we think about an upcoming exam or a possible embarrassing situation. This sort of reaction isn't helpful because there's nothing we can physically do in this moment to fight or to flee, and having hormones like adrenaline coursing through our system actually gets in the way of our cognitive functioning. It contributes to muscle tension and other negative physical conditions, and over time it can compromise our immune systems as well. So what's the alternative to reacting like this? Mindfulness allows us to respond rather than react in challenging or familiar situations. From a place of mindfulness, we can notice our tendency to be reactive and feel threatened, defensive, fearful, or angry, but allow these feelings to arise and fall away as they inevitably do, and then choose the more adaptive and responsive way of contending with the situation. For example, if you think back to the last situation that you handled poorly, perhaps it was an interaction with a friend or a colleague, sitting here now, you can probably come up with a better way that you could have handled that situation that would have been better for all concerned. So what happened between then and now? You probably didn't learn any new coping skills. What you did was you calmed down. Some time has passed and you're more relaxed and able to access your own inner wisdom to recognize and consider a more adaptive response that wasn't charged with strong emotion. The great news is that you had this better way of coping already available to you, but you just weren't able to access it at the moment because you were too caught up in the reaction, and adrenaline was clouding your ability to think clearly. With the practice of mindfulness, you're more likely to be able to ride the wave of sympathetic arousal and let it subside so that you can think more clearly and effectively and formulate a better solution or response. The tool is already in your toolbox, you just aren't able to find it in your aroused state. This same principle can apply to less stressful situations that are more habitual and conditioned. This is evident in the case of optical illusions, where at first glance you think something's one way, but upon closer inspection it's actually something else, or both. The concept of seeing things without the lens of conditioning or habit is sometimes referred to as beginner's mind, or seeing things as if for the first time, with that same sense of open curiosity and receptivity that allows for possibility and creativity in situations that normally seem predictable and dull. We introduce people in our mindfulness classes to this experience by placing a raisin in their hands and inviting them to explore it as if they've never seen it before, because they haven't, in fact, seen this raisin before. This fosters our natural curiosity and allows for discovery of things that are there but have not previously been appreciated because they've been overlooked in our tendency to see things in only a superficial and rushed way. Bringing beginner's mind to a problem or obstacle can often reveal solutions or opportunities that were overlooked or glossed over when in a more conditioned or habitual state of mind. Take the example of the Post-it note. It was developed when an engineer at 3M Corporation was trying to create a new kind of adhesive and found that his invention wasn't sticky enough. Rather than toss it out and try again, he saw that this might actually have an application other than the one he was trying to address. I would suggest that it was a beginner's mind that allowed him to see a so-called failure as actually a great opportunity. What else arises when we come out of our reactive minds and into our responsive way of being? We grow much closer to our intentions. Think about any behaviors or habits you might want to change in yourself. You have an intention to quit smoking or be more attentive to your partner or to get less angry in certain situations. Sitting here, listening to me talk, you can feel the intention to make this change and to grow as a person. But what happens in your day-to-day life? You probably find yourself repeatedly falling into your old habits and patterns because you've been practicing them for years. So you end up with an intention to quit smoking that is overridden in the moment by a desire to smoke such that you find yourself smoking, just to use one example. How do we end up doing what we really don't want to do? Or vice versa? Does it mean that we're fooling ourselves about our intentions? Probably not. What happens is that we have an intention and then we get caught up in reactivity and are temporarily out of our minds when we fall back on old habits. The practice of mindfulness entails coming back into our minds so that we fully inhabit them moment to moment and can stay in tune with our intentions when those tempting situations arise. One can think of intentions as actually a form of ethic. We each hold a set of principles about how we live our lives or conduct ourselves that tend to guide us in our decisions, choices, and behaviors. But we often get so caught up in reactivity and old habits that we override those ethical principles. This usually happens because we don't recognize the plethora of choice points that we face throughout our day and feel as if we don't get to play an active role in our own lives. When we slow down and pay attention to our experience as it unfolds, moment by moment, we find that the choice points are everywhere. They reside in our choice of who we spend time with, what food we take into our body, what projects we say yes or no to, how we choose to spend our time and energy. The list is endless. Once we stop letting habit and conditioning dictate what we do and take an active role in our lives by exercising choice when we can, then we've taken a radical step toward a deliberate and mindful way of conducting ourselves that is much more in line with the ethical principles in which we believe.